Welcome to the Body Smart Podcast, where we remove roadblocks to fitness and health to empower you to master your health habits. We help you become body smart.
So hello, everybody, and we're excited to be able to be interviewing Janice today. So she has done this physiogenomic testing, so testing her DNA that we've been talking about here at Body Smart. And so we want to share more about what this testing is and what it can do for you by learning a little bit more about Janice's story. So hi, Janice, and thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're excited to learn more about, we've talked a little bit with our audience about, what the testing is and things like that, but we want to learn more about what it can do for you, like how it can impact your life and decision making and all kinds of things. And so we want to dive into your story about how you've used it and what it meant to you and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about like how you did the testing and maybe why and what you thought about the results and all those types of things. Tell us your story.
Well, first of all, I think that everyone's a little curious about their DNA. And in our day and age, being able to test it and to know a little bit about what genetic risks you might have, I think can really influence how you are going to conduct your life in a lot of different ways. For example, in my DNA testing, it says I have a genetic risk for ACL tears. And that's kind of a big deal. I've never experienced that, but it lets me know that before I get up in the day and do something physical, like today, I plan on going skiing. And maybe I ought to do a little stretching so that I don't end up tearing my ACL. The other thing is that I have a genetic risk for rotator cuff injuries, which I have experienced. And when it came up, I was a little bit confused of, wow, what did I do? How did I do anything different than anybody else?
Mm-hmm.
And but then that was before I got my genetic test. And when I got my genetic test and I saw that on there, I thought, well, I probably didn't do anything different than anybody else. I just have a risk factor here. And maybe I need to be just a little bit more careful.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it's just things like that.
Totally. So it's interesting that you bring up the rotator cuff one, because last night we were talking with a physical therapist that was like, really, how do you test for a gene for rotator cuff? And so like, how is the rotator cuff different than other pathologies, like other soft tissue injuries and things like that? And so the answer to that is actually really fascinating. So there are certain biological characteristics that we have, like some people start to lose blood flow to that area, usually around 40 years old, it starts to diminish. And those are specific genes that code for that happening in certain people. And so, that can increase your risk and some other things. And so there are actually specific genes that code for those characteristics that lead to those things, which is like, it's mind-boggling that we can get that nitty-gritty with it, but it's so cool. So yeah, knowing that now in your life allows you to say, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit more I need to do with keeping my shoulders strong and mobile and all those things so that you avoid those risks, right?
Well,
the consequences of those risks.
Yeah, exactly, because I do have that genetic risk. And by the way, the actual test was really simple to take. It was just it's just a swab in my mouth.
Nothing. It takes really just 2 seconds. And
I mean, if people think that it's something like a blood draw or something, it isn't. It's just a little it's like a little Q-tip swab in the inside of my cheek. No big deal.
Right. It's not even in the nose like the COVID ones that were so awful, right? Where they were trying to poke your brain. Right. It's not like that. It's just, you just swab your cheeks and around your gum line and stuff like that. And pretty easy.
That was it.
Yeah. And so when you first did it, were you nervous about the results? What were you thinking there? Because I know some people are like, maybe I don't want to know. What were your thoughts and feelings about that?
Well, the thing is that with the genetic test, it tells you where your risks are. And so it can kind of look like a lot of bad news.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to consider that there's a lot of things that you probably don't have a genetic risk for.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, like with my endocrine system, my sole genetic risk was the growth hormone, that I'm just a little low on the growth hormone, which is really interesting because I've got a family that's not, you wouldn't say that they're very tall. I mean, you wouldn't say that they're super short, but some of them are kind of short.
Yeah.
I am not really all that short. So I'm 5'7". So you wouldn't think that I had that as a genetic risk, but what it says to me is maybe it just never manifest.
Yeah.
That I have that risk factor, but it's not a big deal. And that's another thing to think about, is that even like with the rotator cuff, or even with that, if just to know that you've got that genetic risk, it doesn't mean that you're doomed, that something is going to come up. But also, you can no longer say, oh, it just must be genetics, it runs in my family, because now you actually know your genes, and whether or not it runs in your family is irrelevant. It's what do you have?
Right. And
What
and honestly, and knowing that ahead of time, even if it does run in your family, and maybe you do have a higher risk for it, now that you know, like with your ACL, you can be proactive about doing things that help prevent that. So that even though like you do have a higher risk, doesn't mean it has to be your reality, because you know ahead of time, which I love that.
Right.
So I always use with with kind of what you're talking about, I always use the analogy that my son, my oldest son is 6'3", I'm 5'7", and my wife is 5'1".
Oh,
so we have this ginormous son for our family. But at the same time, all of my brothers are really tall. My shortest brother is 6'1", and my wife, all her sisters are 5'7". So we just both happen to be the short ones in our family, but we come from fairly tall families. And so like you're saying, like sometimes those genes just don't express in you. So even though you have a high risk, doesn't mean, like you said, that you're doomed to have that. But what it can mean is that by living healthy lifestyle factors, you can make sure that you either avoid or have the best possible outcome if you do have, if those genes do express in you. So
exactly. That's true. So that might be really consistent with I've got some genes for heart disease and a couple of different cardiovascular genes. I mean, and they're pretty significant genes. And I to this point have not experienced any heart disease, but I know full well that you can turn those genes on or off with your diet and your lifestyle. So it's really important to me to have an active lifestyle, but also it's important to me what I eat. And that can really influence whether or not those genes are turned on or not. There's been a little bit of cardiovascular events in my family history, but it's hard to know if that's a genetic risk factor, if there's a genetic risk factor there or not.
Right.
Simply because you can look at somebody's diet, you can look at their weight, and say, well, they brought it on, which all of that you don't even need to have that genetic risk factor to bring that on by really poor diet. But if you do have the genetic risk factor for some of those things, you may want to be a little bit more careful and think about those things. So I'm glad to know that I have those risk factors for sure.
Right. Yeah, totally. When you see that, maybe an aunt or an uncle or your dad or, things like that may have had some cardiovascular disease problems. And so you think, well, do I have that risk? Do I, you always wonder. And so knowing that lets you go, okay, I need to be more diligent maybe than dad or uncle or whoever were, I need to be a bit more proactive. And I love that it kind of gives you that extra emphasis on leading that healthy lifestyle and eating those healthy, aspects of your diet that keep you with a different level of motivation, maybe, to do those things.
Well, it definitely is a different level of motivation to do those things, at
Mm-hmm.
least for me. I mean, you could say, oh, that's far off. I don't need to worry about that now, but that's not true. It's absolutely
Right.
not true. You need to think about that every single day. And the nice thing is that what's good for your heart is good for your brain, is good for
Mm-hmm.
your joints, is good for every other aspect of
Right.
your body.
Totally. Yeah. Well, you just feel better in general, and then that makes you more capable of doing. And the more you do, the more you can do.
Yeah,
And I always
right.
try to hit home to people. It's the way we take care of ourselves in our 20s, 30s, 40s that allow us to be the type of person we kind of always thought we would be in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? The decisions we make
Yeah,
during those early periods when the consequences don't feel as big,
right.
they're the what lead to the consequences of how we're able to live and be active and do the things we love to do, when we're a Medicare recipient. you
Yeah.
know
Well, I can attest to that. I am going skiing today, and my most of my peers are not
right.
able to do that anymore. And when I was in my 20s and 30s or even 40s, I had peers on the hill,
Yeah.
and they're still there, but there's less and less of them.
Right. Yeah. You just see friends and relatives start dropping off, right? And you start
Yes.
seeing their
Yeah.
world shrink down, right? That they stop
Ooh,
doing
good
as
way to
many
put it.
physical
Mm-hmm.
things. They stop going on as many vacations. They stop, even friendships and friend groups shrink because they're just less capable of getting out and doing. And
Yeah,
and they
true.
and they'll often say things like, well, it just runs in my family to have a bad back, or things like that. And
Yeah.
they don't
Uh-huh.
honestly know that, uh, as far as if that really is what's affecting them, or is it just a sedentary lifestyle. And so by knowing your
Right.
risk factors and knowing them earlier on, you really can intervene and say, these are the things affecting me and these aren't the things affecting me. And so
Right.
I can be proactive about the things that I can control, and it helps me,
Right.
do everything better. Even the things that I maybe can't control that are genetic, it at least
Mm-hmm.
allows me to have the best possible outcome with those things.
Well, that's really true because for me, I'm looking at some of those genes and I'm thinking, well, let's not light those genes up with the sedentary lifestyle.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
keep those genes suppressed.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like you mentioned, diet, or environmental factors, like if you've got a high propensity towards skin cancer or something like that, then maybe I need to be a little bit more diligent about how I use sunscreen or time in the sun or things like that. It
Yeah.
just allows you to
Yeah.
make those subtle decisions in your life, um, more
Yeah.
effectively. Um, I
Agreed. It really
yeah.
does.
Yeah, like I said, I was talking with a physical therapist about this, last night. We even mentioned about how the certain just everyday lifestyle decisions, can be influenced by that. So it's kind of a funny story, but toilet time, even if you have certain genetic risks for like pelvic floor disorders, spending too much time, bringing your cell phone into the bathroom with you may not be a good idea, because that puts extra pressure on the pelvic floor by sitting, on the toilet that long. And so knowing
Oh,
that if that's
yeah.
a risk factor for you, you can modify that in your life and make sure that that's not where you're spending your time. Because a lot of people do kind of like to
Yeah.
escape because they can close the door and be
Uh-huh.
alone, and so,
Uh-huh.
kind of a goofy example, but when we can even take those little modifications into our lifestyle, it can add up to avoiding bigger problems.
Yeah, that's funny. You should mention that one because that one is in my genes.
Oh, there you go. So there's your tip for
Yeah.
that. That's how
But
you can
but
help avoid
it's
that.
it's really true. I mean, that's not been something that has been appealing to me to spend time there. But you're
Hmm.
right. A lot of people really do.
Yeah.
And that would be something important to know.
Yeah. And just all those things, like by staying healthy and active, or being proactive and saying, okay, well, if pelvic floor disorders are
Mhm.
a risk for me, maybe I should be proactive about seeing a physical therapist that can teach me how to strengthen those things. So, think of how many of your peers stopped running because they had problems peeing their pants when they run, right? Like, well, right. I don't mind running, or I like going to those classes at the gym. But every time I do, I pee my pants and it's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
It's like, yeah, which I understand that. At the same time, there's a lot you can do for it. And so if they know that, that's why this is happening. It's not my fault. Because I think sometimes we blame ourselves when things like that happen. But if we understand that it's just part of your genes, it's like, okay, that's not my fault, but that doesn't mean there's nothing I can do about it. So let's be proactive and take care of
it. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So when you got that testing done, like, so I mentioned that earlier, some people are afraid of those results. Was that as scary as you thought, or was it actually like comforting in some ways? What'd you think?
Well, when I first got it, I kind of felt like, wow, that's bad. This is bad. And then I had to kind of stop and think, wait a minute. These are just risk factors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful to know them. And the whole point of this test isn't meant to give me all the good news. Good news, your eyes are blue. It's not in the test. That's not what that's about. It's really about, hey, it does give you some list of things that you don't have any genetic risk for. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that I can just go ahead and do all the risky things for those things either. I mean, I feel like, okay, I've got some risk factors. Now I know where I want to focus and how I want to live my life to not turn them on. And then I realized, you know what? That is the good news. The good news is knowing, as being aware, having that information, because putting your head in the sand and saying, oh, I don't want to know. Well, then you also don't know what to do.
Right. Oh, I love that. That's such a great way of saying that. If we hide from that, then we don't learn the answers of how to best manage that, how to help ourselves through that. So that's a great way of putting that. Head in the sand healthcare is not a is not a good way to do it, right?
No, it really isn't.
Being proactive with something like this really does open up doors, and it can be scary if you do have some genetic things that might be life altering or things like that. At the same time, it doesn't have to alter your life as much when you take those proactive steps. So I was just talking with somebody that's engaged actually to be married, and he was like, one of the things that I'm excited about with getting this and having my fiance get it is then we can understand, like, if we have kids, things like that, what are those things that we may pass to our kids, and can we be proactive with them about trying to minimize those risks, or I think that gives extra incentive for healthy diets and other things like that. If you have markers for autism or things like that maybe
exactly,
having your kids screened earlier so that you can manage that appropriately from the beginning, so their trajectory in life is so much further ahead than if we wait on those things and stuff. So
exactly. A young couple who's thinking of starting a family, I mean, great to do their genetic testing, but also once they have their child, that baby, they can genetically test that baby immediately. So easy. And one of the things that I think is cool is that once you have your genetic test done, that information is always being updated. And so if new things come out that may affect you, that they find, they will send you that email to update your results, so you can know, like, all the latest, greatest information and how that may affect your DNA, your body. So once we have that, we don't have to run it again and again and again. Like, we have your DNA, we have it sequenced and coded and everything. And so all the new information that comes out, it just updates that and lets us know any changes to your profile, which to me, that's incredible. Because that research, awesome. We've been doing the Human Genome Project for, I think, 20-ish, 25-ish years. Yeah, I think it started in the 1990s, and the government
Yeah.
funded it, and they thought it was going to take forever, and it was actually a little bit quicker than they anticipated.
Yeah.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really an incredible thing. And so being able to, so Physiogenomic pulls from all of the major testing centers of the Human Genome Project across the world and pulls that data in. And so, having that latest, greatest research in gene research is incredible. And so being kind of on the front lines of that. What's that?
Always, because your test will never be dated. It'll never be like, well, yes, I had that, but now they test for all kinds of things and they can find genes for these other things, and I don't have that. It's not like that. You will always have it. You will always be current.
Right. Well, and it's amazing how many things they can test for, but how many things that they're still waiting on better research for before we're reporting on it. So that's one of the things that I was so impressed with as I was diving into the research behind it and everything.
Yeah.
That Physiogenomic doesn't use stuff that isn't really highly validated. So there's a bunch of conditions that they're watching that they don't yet include because the research quality isn't up to standard quite yet. So they're waiting for new research on those things to come out. So, it is a valid test too. That's one of the things that people wonder about, because there's a lot of other brands that do some level of genetic testing, but it's not quite to the same depth that this is. And so this, I think he said they run your DNA over 1,000 times to make sure every piece of that code is accurate. And so that's, just amazing how they do that and can make it so accurate to you, and you'll then have that information for the rest of your life, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that you really hit a point that people may not entirely understand the depth of that testing. Mm-hmm. There are other companies out there. There's some companies that probably come to mind, as we speak, but I have a relative who did some testing with someone else, and it was really interesting to see how incomplete it really was. It was almost worth it. It was just entertainment almost.
Yeah. And so some of those tests, depending on how they do it, they test for a few key things, but they really only test for a couple of the genetic markers, not all of them that can code for that type of cancer or that thing. And then some of the genetic tests, goofy enough, are based mostly on self-reporting. So when people sign up, it makes them fill out a questionnaire that's like, well, grandma, my parents told me that grandma died of this and so died of this, and I had an aunt that died of this. And so that's how they kind of gather that data. And it's like, well, self-reporting is really
not DNA
poor. Right. And that's
super not poor. That is not DNA.
Right. Well, so when somebody self-reports that, and then they have a ancestor that's in common, then they just kind of lump that together that maybe you have a higher risk for that because this person 2 generations later said that they died of sheep lung, which could have been emphysema to lung cancer, who knows what that really meant. And so that's one of those things that makes this really this is your DNA. And that Human Genome Project was able to look at what each piece of DNA codes for what, and now we can line that up, and it's pretty amazing what we can do with it now. So I love the effect that this can have on people's life and lifestyle and health. And so I guess overall, would you say that it's changed the way you think about health and wellness?
So I'm pretty focused on health and wellness anyway, except that with the DNA testing, it has made me more aware, absolutely more aware. It makes me think a little bit more about every meal, every day, the exercise I'm getting. And it's not burdensome at all. It's more like, hey, I'm happy to do this because I know that it's really affecting me. One of the things I did too was I went ahead and got my vitamin and minerals absorption testing done.
Yes.
Of course, that's not going to tell me, it's not going to tell me my vitamin and mineral levels that I have right now. is just going to tell me how well do I absorb vitamin and minerals. And that's been very helpful too, to know,
Yeah.
do I need to maybe supplement something that I wasn't supplementing, which
Yeah.
that did come up for me. And do I need to maybe slow down on something if I'm over absorbing
Mm.
something as well?
Yeah.
And because you want to keep all of that in balance. And one of the best ways to do that is with diet. But if you can look at that vitamin and mineral panel, and let's say that you're not absorbing something very well, it's pretty easy to find what foods have that in it and add
Totally.
those foods into your diet a little bit more, perhaps, or take a supplement. So now I'm taking a molybdenum supplement because I don't absorb that very well. Something
Interesting.
that is never talked about. People
Right.
don't, I mean, you don't really even think about it, but now I'm taking that as a supplement just
Hmm.
to make sure that I stay in balance there.
That is
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That's those types of things. We were talking about that with a patient just the other day about their vitamin D levels. Because this time of
Mhm.
year, and especially with how much snow we've been getting and rainy, snowy weather, um, the seasonal affective disorder, or SAD,
Mhm.
is really
Mhm.
prevalent. We're not getting very much sunlight. It's wintertime, so we're indoors a lot more. And so vitamin D levels in a lot of people are low. And so they get that
Yeah.
seasonal depression. And if you have on top of that, maybe some vitamin D absorption deficiency there,
Gosh, that would be terrible.
yeah, so that may be why they get the seasonal affective disorder so bad, right? And why it may
Yeah.
last longer than other people or start earlier than other people. So knowing that, and knowing that they may need to supplement with vitamin D more than other
Mhm.
people may really help. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
just getting light on him too. I mean, it's
yeah,
interesting
the
that you
light
mentioned.
therapies. Yeah.
I mean, I actually have that SAD,
Hmm.
said, and
Yep.
for me, when I saw that on my genetic test, I went, "Aha!
Yeah.
I'm not making it up. It's
I,
real,"
I
because I
don't just go
really do
crazy every
feel that.
winter. Yeah.
No, I don't. Yeah, I'm not all of a sudden just really sad.
Right.
But for me, I do make sure that my vitamin D levels are up, but also I I personally feel like it's a little bit more than that. I need some sunlight. I need, even though
Totally.
the sunlight this time of year doesn't really have a whole lot of the UVB that helps you produce the vitamin D, I there's something about just the light itself.
Hmm.
And so on a sunny day, I do need to go outside, even if it's just for 20 minutes or something, and
Right.
just get some sunlight. It
Right.
does make a difference.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
And we've actually in our family decided, my wife and I, that it's worth the expense of going on a trip to a sunny location every kind of
in, in the winter.
midwinter. Yeah. Just to
Yeah.
kind of recharge the batteries.
Yes.
I talk about, I kind of joke with my wife that she's like a solar panel, that she needs the sun to be able to function and have energy. And so
Well, and
we've
I
kind of
think
just
it's nice
planned
to
that
know
in.
that, I think that's really important to do that. And it's nice to know that you aren't crazy. You're not just
Right.
making this thing up to have a vacation in a sunny location, which is funny you should mention that, because my daughter right now is on a very sunny island with her family. And my thought was, well, good, because they'll get that sunshine need midwinter.
Totally. And that's, I mean, to me, it's so worth the expense, because if that keeps her liking me and the kids, totally worth it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's fun.
But yeah, understanding that about yourself by having that tested, it allows you to really just shape the decisions you make and be more intentional with your health and wellness decisions, and
Yeah,
allows you to be more proactive and get out ahead of things instead of waiting for that train to hit you. It allows you to be able to say, here's the steps that I can take to make sure
yeah.
that it's going to, if it does pop up in my life, the effects are going to be as minimal as possible. And I love that.
Well, yeah, and especially with seasonal affective disorder, you can get out in front of that. And
Totally. Yeah.
and just for me, really, to know that I'm not making it up, that it is a real thing.
Right.
Um, That's really important. And even in the winter, if I start feeling just a little bit like, I feel a little bit low.
Yeah, just low
Okay.
energy and
Just all of that. I know that that's what it is, and that I can immediately start taking steps to
yeah.
change it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Start, it's interesting. We got through the holidays and it was like, man, why am I feeling so tired? What's
Yeah.
going on? And when we went through the list, it's like, well, over the holidays, we were up at the cabin with family, so we didn't eat as well as we maybe should
Mhm.
have, or we ate too
Mhm.
well, maybe is how you should say that.
Yeah.
And then it's, we haven't seen the sun in a while. And, we kind of listed off a few things that it was like, oh yeah, all of those things are compounding. And so when we started taking care of those little lifestyle things, the energy came back, all of those things. And so it just gives you such a more complete view of your overall health so that you can do the right things.
Yeah. And speaking of this year and in our area, that this apparently was one of the snowiest Decembers on record, or maybe even the snowiest December on record, which means that there really wasn't any sunshine
Yeah, there just wasn't.
out
Yeah.
there. So yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, that helps us to know what we can do to prevent all those things, the light therapy, the nutrition, all
right,
those things.
right.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. If you had one piece of advice or encouragement, if somebody's considering getting the testing done, what would you say? Put you on
I
the
would say
spot.
go ahead and do it. Oh, for sure. Go ahead and do it. It's, first of all, it's real. It's not entertainment like some of the other tests. It makes some of the other tests look almost silly, because this one is so complete.
Yeah.
And it also can affect your life, like what we were just talking about with seasonal affective disorder, that uh, it validated me to see that, because in the past, there's been people that have kind of pointed at me and said, we're just making that up. That's just this thing that they've made up. Well, no, it isn't. It's a for real thing. And you can see that, but also understand that when you see something that looks really scary, maybe some cardiovascular disease or something that looks kind of frightening, to realize that information and that knowledge is so powerful to you. Now you know that you have the genetic risk factor. You're not doomed to that. There
Right.
are things that you can do, and go ahead and get started with, where you are today. No matter where you are today, no matter what you've done in the past or haven't done in the past, there are things that you can do starting right now, right here where you're at.
Yeah. I love that. That is so in
That,
line with what we teach people in our clinic every day. We talk about, let's forget about the past things, because it really doesn't matter. Let's start with where you're at and build from there, because we can change so many of those risk factors, the lifestyle risk factors, by just starting today and moving forward and not beating ourselves up for the past. And so I love that.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just forward where you're at, because so you have these genetic risk factors, or maybe even some of those genes have been turned on, and that's why somebody has come to the clinic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps. And so, but you can manage, and it's really nice to know, yes, it's in my genes, but there are things I can do to turn those genes off, to suppress them, and to keep them suppressed my entire life. And to know that you're not just willy-nilly stabbing in the dark. Let's try this, let's try that. Exactly what you need to do based on your genes.
Yeah. And it removes the victim mentality, or the fact that you have to be a victim of it. Instead, it empowers you to be able to take action and get out ahead of things. So I love that perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure talking with you, and hearing your perspective on the testing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Cameron.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to, seeing lots of people get this testing done so that they can, do what you're doing and living that healthy, active lifestyle and not letting it shrink your world, but instead letting it expand what you can do, and knowing that you have that, freedom of being able to get out ahead of anything that may be in front of you, and be healthy and active and have a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's been working today.
Yeah, it's been fun talking with you. And so, yeah, thanks so much for joining us, everybody that has stuck with us on the call. And we look forward to catching you on the next one. We love sharing this information here at Body Smart about all things health and wellness related. And so this is just another tool that we have now with this genetic testing through Physiogenomics. And so we're excited to share more about that with you. So again, thanks so much, Janice. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Body Smart podcast. Join us in the Body Smart community on Facebook to share your successes or ask a question for our next episode. Now get out there and take the next step toward living your active lifestyle.